President Trump is postponing most tariffs on imports from Mexico. The president announced the policy shift with a post on Truth Social and says he made the decision after speaking with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. The president says the 25% tariff on Mexican goods covered in the USMCA trade agreement will be postponed until April 2nd. That's when the Trump administration is set to announce so-called reciprocal tariffs on imports from around the world.
You know, there's a lot of opportunity to improve expenditures in the government, and then we're making good progress there.
That is Elon Musk leaving a meeting with House Republicans yesterday on Capitol Hill. Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency have been running roughshod through the federal government, slashing programs and firing workers. With a thumbs up from President Trump, it appears Musk is just getting started. But his no-holds-barred approach is frustrating some Republicans who worry Musk's efforts could lead to political backlash. Joining me to discuss this and more, Jesse Byrnes, senior editor here at The Hill. So Musk met with both senators and members of the House Republicans yesterday. Coming out of the meetings, Republicans said publicly things are good now. They exchanged cell phone numbers. They're going to work together. Musk is going to keep them informed. Do they say the same message about Musk privately?
Well, I think we saw even a bit different tone between the House and the Senate. With senators, they were much more direct with Musk, saying that they have concerns about some of these programs. We saw, you'll remember even last week, the White House Chief of Staff was on Capitol Hill, and senators were voicing frustration, saying Musk is doing all of these things at these different agencies. We need a better heads up. With the House meeting yesterday with Musk, it was much more conciliatory. They were kind of gushing over him. And for Republican senators, they know as well, they have to some extent, kiss the ring when it comes to with Musk and Trump, because they are worried about primaries. They are worried about the wealthiest man in the world who has already spent hundreds of millions of dollars in past elections, potentially backing rivals. And so they do have deep concerns over some of these programs being slashed, some of these federal firings that are taking place. And to the extent possible, though, they want to support the DOGE agenda.
Senator Rand Paul suggested the Republicans use a rescission package to enact some of the DOGE cuts. That's a novel idea, Congress using legislation to enact policy. But do you think that Congress really wants to assert itself here, or is it kind of more comfortable letting Musk and DOGE be the bad guys, gets caught up in the court, and they don't have to take a sledgehammer to government programs?
Well, I think the tacit acknowledgement from some lawmakers that we're seeing them become more and more vocal about, especially Senate Republicans, is Congress has the power of the purse. And so they're trying to reclaim that from Musk and from DOGE. At the same time, Musk is taking a lot of the arrows on behalf of the Trump administration when it comes to trying to reduce the size of the federal government, slashing these different programs, and trying to shutter whole agencies like USAID and potentially next the Department of Education. But there is a little bit of concern that we're starting to see come out from Republican lawmakers. How are they going to pay for this? And right now, there is no backing from these cuts. They are unilaterally being taken place, and lawmakers realize that unless they codify these cuts, the next Democratic president could just try to reverse them.
Some being challenged in the courts as well. During that speech before a joint session of Congress, President Trump surprised many, even some in his own party, when he tore into the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act. Let's take a listen.
Your CHIPS Act is a horrible, horrible thing. We give hundreds of billions of dollars, and it doesn't mean a thing. They take our money and they don't spend it. You should get rid of the CHIP Act, and whatever's left over, Mr. Speaker, you should use it to reduce debt.
You know, that law passed with bipartisan support. 17 Republican senators voted for it. What's the basis for this criticism? It seems to kind of have come out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's kind of unclear exactly why Trump doesn't like this plan. It passed 3 years ago. Money has already been spent. 17 Republicans in the Senate voted for it, 24 in the House. It was bipartisan. And at the same time, Trump has signaled he wants to work with chip manufacturers. He wants to have the federal government really try to foster innovation and bring manufacturing to the U.S., which is really the whole basis for this bill. 3 years ago, this law was trying to shore up U.S. national security by providing incentives for domestic chip manufacturing. And so certainly Trump wants his own agenda, he wants his own legacy, and he wants to have that innovation happen under his watch rather than his predecessor, Joe Biden.
Any repeal faces pretty long shot of getting pass this.
Really
at a
no
filibuster.
appetite right now among Republicans in Congress to try to revert that. No.
The Trump administration is hinting that it could bring criminal referrals to employees at USAID. The statement came from the agency's acting deputy director during a closed-door briefing yesterday on Capitol Hill. The reports from the meeting are unclear as to whether this is a serious threat, but it doesn't sound like there was evidence in that meeting presented of like criminal activity. Members of both parties seemed to leave the meeting a little bit frustrated about a lack of information sharing. Have you seen anything from all the information that has been released by DOGE and these congressional committees about USAID, evidence of criminal behavior?
Well, certainly a lot of questions that remain answered from that meeting yesterday. And there have even been Democrats who have acknowledged if there is fraud, if there's abuse, prosecute it, actually make the case in court and try to provide the evidence to make this happen. Because Democrats are trying to say, well, there really isn't anything here. Now, of course, we all know that there is fraud and abuse that happen, and cases are prosecuted across the federal government, different agencies going back decades. But have they actually uncovered anything new? And if they have, then they have to prove that in the court of law. And if not, then Democrats are trying to call bluff here.
President Trump is stepping up his attacks on Hamas, demanding all Israeli hostages and the remains of hostages being held in Gaza be released, or Hamas will face destruction. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Trump has lost his patience. It seems like we're on the brink of a resumption of violence here.
Well, and this is really a huge moment for U.S. foreign policy. It's long-standing precedent going back more than 2 decades for the U.S. to not directly engage with groups that the U.S. has designated as terrorist groups. And Hamas has been designated as a terrorist group for more than 2 decades. And so the Trump administration now is signaling a shift in approach. So instead of working with the Egyptians and the Qataris as intermediaries, they're trying to directly engage with Hamas. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's any kind of pushback so far. We heard Lindsey Graham, an ally of Trump on Capitol Hill, saying he's okay. He trusts Trump to actually carry this out. But it is worth underscoring that this is a big shift in U.S. foreign policy to be directly engaging with Hamas, while at the same time the Israelis say that there are potentially dozens of hostages still there that they're trying to get out.
There's an interesting report from Reuters that came out today that the Trump administration is looking into revoking the legal status for nearly 250,000 Ukrainians that fled the conflict with Russia and currently reside here in the U.S., potentially putting them on a fast track to deportation, part of this broader push to revoke legal status for about 1.8 million migrants, including some 70,000 Afghans, many of whom worked alongside U.S. military forces during the war there. The White House saying today, I think that the decision is not final, hasn't been made on that. But what do you make of that report?
Yeah, certainly the White House pushing back. The administration realizes that it has a lot of levers at its disposal. And so, the broad theme, they're trying to get Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table. They're trying to end this war. But there is an economic angle to this. There's potential bilateral minerals deal on the table for Ukraine and the U.S. There's certainly a pain that can be felt for Ukrainians in Ukraine, but also here in the United States when it comes to visas and other restrictions or lack thereof. And so, certainly there are a lot of levers at the administration's disposal, and so at this point it remains unclear exactly which ones they're willing to pull. But we have seen a change in tone over the past number of days with Trump and Ukraine following that blowout in the White House last week.
I would think a moral issue too at play here, especially when it comes to Afghans who worked alongside U.S. military members threatening their own lives, possibly being forced back into the country.
And there's precedent with Afghanistan as a member, as well as other individuals who have received a temporary protected status in the United States. The Trump administration has shown that it's willing to take a hardline stance on them, regardless of the opposition and the criticism.
All right. I'll leave it at that. Jesse Byrnes, thanks so much.
Thanks, Joe.
A second federal judge has indefinitely blocked President Trump's funding freeze on federal grants and loans. The decision comes after Democratic state attorneys general sued the Trump administration over a now rescinded Office of Management and Budget memo. The letter instructed federal agencies to pause the funding. Judge John McConnell says the administration put itself above Congress with its sweeping freeze that covered trillions of dollars in federal spending. The decision adds to another block imposed by a federal judge in D.C. at the end of last month. Under the latest order, the Trump administration cannot implement an across-the-board funding freeze under a different name. The order still allows agencies to limit funding access on an individualized basis. The American Trucking Association is warning there will be danger ahead for the trucking industry if the Trump administration moves forward with tariffs imposed on Mexico and Canada. NewsNation's Nancy Loo is on the road with the latest from truckers who say they are bracing for tariff impacts.
There is a lot of anxiety throughout the supply chain in which truckers are a key piece in getting consumer goods to your door. Now that tariffs have kicked in, for Canada at least, there's word of trucks actually turning around at the border to avoid paying that 25% tariff at customs.
Told us to hold off, wait, don't send the customs clearance through. Just that definitely did happen.
Okay. Does that make you worry that that's going to spread?
It does. Just no matter what, there's a lot of anxiety about what the next day will bring.
Greg Dubuque is a third-generation trucker, and like many others in the industry, he's worried and anxious over an uncertain future. But things continue to roll at Liberty West Trucking, which has been transporting goods between the U.S. and Canada for decades. Clothing, produce, and all kinds of items were already on the move before the tariffs kicked in, so companies are beginning to pay up in order to keep business projects and perishable products in the pipeline. Nearly half of all U.S. imports come from Mexico, Canada, and China. In the short term, unwinding the process would be costlier than paying the new U.S. tariffs. For nearly 3 million American truckers, major concern over the long term.
We need to keep our wheels rolling, that's for sure, and rolling with good customer freight that pays the bills. And if that's not there, that would really hurt our industry in the short term.
How painful is just one day?
One day to us with 40 trucks, we're somewhere around the neighborhood of $50,000. If the fleet was to stop in one day, that's what the cost would be. You're looking at an average cost of $1,200 a day for a truck.
There's major relief for a 1-month exemption for the auto industry, but that's only 1 month in which American automakers are expected to plot and plan for more manufacturing within our borders. That obviously won't happen fast, so the fear is lower demand for trucking those goods after next month. For Liberty West Trucking and many other companies, containers with car parts are crisscrossing into Mexico and Canada multiple times a day. Of course, American truckers were a key voting bloc for President Trump last year, so hope is now hinging on that support. Drew?
NewsNation's Nancy Loo, thank you. Award-winning musical Hamilton has become the latest casualty in President Trump's Kennedy Center takeover. Producers of the Broadway hit are canceling plans to perform at the Kennedy Center next year, citing Trump's appointment of himself as the chair of the institution. A number of stars have cut ties with the Kennedy Center after Trump became chair, including Shonda Rhimes and Renee Fleming. Golden Globe-nominated actress Issa Rae also canceled her sold-out show at the Kennedy Center for the same reasons. Interim Executive Director Richard Grenell slammed the decision, lambasting the lead producer and show's creator, Lin-Manuel Miranda. He says the pair orchestrated a publicity stunt and do not want Republican Party voters attending their show. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.